This week in CIST 2510, we'll look at Chapter 3, working with CSS, our cascading style sheets. So what CSS is? CSS is a set of rules that allow you to apply formatting to your HTML. So what we're looking at the screen now is basic HTML defaults, where we have our text is going to be aligned to the left. We'll have basic formatting as far as the color of the font will be black. Background is going to be white. The font itself will depend on the browser you're using. But this is what our basic HTML will look like, our formatting. So it's not very attractive. So we have CSS, and we'll talk about 3 different types of CSS that we can use to improve the look and feel of our web pages. The first type of CSS we're going to talk about is our inline style. And this is the CSS that's going to be applied directly to HTML tags. Okay, this is only going to affect that selection of the tag, that occurrence of that tag. As we see in our code here that we have in our H1 tag, we have our font that's set, the size of our font, and then the color of our font. Now with this changes, it's only affecting that one instance. Okay, so it does not affect every other time that it appears. This will override our number 2 that we'll talk about, which will be our page level and our cascading style sheet, our external style sheet that's attached to the page. So our inline will apply only to that one instance. It does have precedence over the other 2 types of CSS. The downfall of this is that it is very tedious to make changes. For example, if I wanted to change all of the H1 tags on this page, I would have to go to each one of these level of code and make that change. Some other types of formatting with CSS, for example, now we're using our page level. Okay, so this is defined in our head section. We start off with the style tag. Once again, remember, if we open a tag, we have to close the tag. And inside that style, we're going to say that we're setting this to text CSS. And we are then applying our properties and our selector. So we have our selector. So this is the tag that we're going to apply this to. And then we then declare, write our declarations, and then the values for that declaration. So in this case, we've applied the font family, the font size, and the color to all instances of H1. So in our body text, that's what the user sees. Every time we see an H1 tag, that is applied throughout the entire page. So if I want to make changes to this, it's as simple as changing it in one space. And that's applied to every time that instance appears on that page. The external style sheet is what we will see here. And this is linked into our head section. So we have a link set up and it's referencing a linked.css. We're saying the relationship is a style sheet and then our type. This pulls in the information from the external sheet and applies it to that page. Every page that we link this to, that will then be linked to that web page. So in our external style sheet, for example, in this one, there's nothing in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy I'm going to place this in here and I'm going to save this style sheet. See now that this has been updated. Okay, so it's been applied to this sheet. Now, if I copy this link, and in my heading section here, I'm going to place this link. The external style sheet will now be applied to these settings. Okay, so over here I do have the H1. So you'll see that in this page now, that external style sheet's being called in and it's overriding my HTML defaults. An external style sheet allows me to quickly make changes that affect every pages that it is linked to. So for example, if I wanted to change this to a different color, and you'll notice that as I start typing, I will get hints. I will get code hints that I can just select from the list. So I'm going to save this. We'll look at our HTML defaults. We'll see that has been changed here. And also at our CSS basic that we've applied this. So this is a way we can quickly update multiple web pages at one time by using an external style sheet. Now, going back to the inline, if I apply the external style sheet to this site, so there is no change. That's because these inline styles override, they take precedence over the external. Now, if I remove this setting here, now it's going to read the external style sheet and bring in that code, which is listed here to set the color for my H1 tags to green. Now, a couple other things I can do as well. You'll see in, for this one example here, I can also use my CSS designer. In here, I'll come in and select, for example, we'll select this text. We'll say we're on the H1. And we're using the class of content and then the H1 tag that resides inside of that class. So we'll look here and we'll see our code. So we got an article tag that's using the class, and that class is going to be applied to everything that's inside of that article tag. So until we find the closing article tag, which should be towards the bottom, right here. So everything within that is in part of that class. Now, the class that we have selected here, the selector that we have selected, this is just saying this is the content. So it's part of that class, and it's the H1. So with this, I can look like in my code and looking at my page level CSS, I can look till I find the content and sometimes this code is a little hard to read. So here we go. We're at the content H1. We've got the color set to purple. The font size set to 300%. We'll look over in our CSS designer and we have that selected. We'll see the same thing here in our properties. Okay, so with this, I can make changes to this color either inside of my CSS code, or I can come over to the properties here and make the changes. I can click on the box and use a color picker. I can use the actual hexadecimal code, the RGBs, the hue and saturation, or I can simply click on the name and type in a new name. I hit enter, you'll see that it's changed here as well, and also in my live view. So there's multiple ways I can change code with using Dreamweaver. Now you'll notice some of this code has the hashtag. Okay, so this is where I'm setting my IDs. And if you look on your book, in your textbook, you will cover a selection of IDs and creating IDs in your text. I'm sorry. So this is setting my IDs. The dots are setting my class. You'll see in the actual code that it will have the section and then the class set. If I'm using IDs, I will have the ID set here. There's no strict rule setting these. By general, though, they kind of want you to stay with classes are more general, while IDs would be more specific. Generally, you would use an ID if it's going to be uniquely formatted for that one area. So you can create your own custom attributes and name them class and IDs and apply them to sections. Okay, the box model. Once again, we've got a class set here. We've got a dot box model. We have this applied to our H1 tag, our paragraph tags, our strong tag, and our EM tags, our tag tags. And you'll see that in our code, once again, we got our div class box model. And we've got that closing division tag, the closing div tag. So everything inside of that is going to have this box model applied to it. So if I remove that closing tag, let's put it at the end of the H1. You'll see that it's only now applied to that H1 tag. Now, one thing we can do in Dreamweaver as well is we can turn this off. So we wanted just to focus on the content. You can come to your View tab, Design View Options, Style Rendering, and you can turn off Display Styles. So now we can just concentrate on our actual content, and then we can go back and apply the styles when we're ready to view those. A couple of things I'm going to talk about here as well. With our CSS, we can combine multiple CSS styles into one line. For example, in this CSS style, we see that we have our multiple selectors set up here on this line. So we have our paragraph, our heading 1s, heading 2s, and so forth. All of these are going to have the same margin. And the margins are set for 10 pixels at the top and bottom and 0 pixels on the right and left. Now, a couple ways we can write our margins out. As we can write them out individually, so we have margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left. So our margins are generally going to go into a clockwise. Let me create some space here. We'll give you an example. Generally, our margins are going to be written like this. So if I was writing my paragraph margins, for example, and then I want to make sure I close that. So all my paragraphs are now going to have this margins here. I'm going to remove this for a second. Actually, I'm just going to remove the P. So wherever the paragraph is applied that doesn't have a another margin settings, because those margins have just now changed. For example, let's find a paragraph. So this area here, the style is affecting. We'll go back up to our paragraph that we put in. And let's change the margins to, let's do something drastic here. Let's see how this changed. Once again, I don't remember where we was at in the code. But we've increased the margins for this. Now, we don't have to write the margins this way. So while we can do this, we can also write this with more of a shorthand to where we write our margins such as this. So now our paragraph margins, we're writing, this is our top, our right, our bottom, and our left. If our margins, for example, were the same, so if we had the bottom at 20, the top at 20, everywhere else in our code. So this tells me that I have 20 pixels on the top and bottom, and I have 5 pixels on the left and right. Once again, one website I want you guys to familiarize yourself with is the W3 Schools. And the W3 Schools does have a lot of tools that can be used for not only HTML, JavaScript, but we also have tools here for CSS. So with this, you have all kinds of different options over here to see how to change the backgrounds, for example, the background colors. You can repeat images. You can set your paddings, your borders, how to change the format for your text. All of the items that you will need to do with CSS can be found on the W3 Schools.